What if I told you that NASA might already be colonizing another planet? In secret, it sounds like science fiction, but leaked documents, anonymous reports, and suspicious images suggest something much bigger than any manned mission you've ever seen. The question no one wants to answer out loud is, why so much secrecy? Why does NASA censor parts of images of Mars? And why, even with all today's technology, are there dark areas in records that should be public? The truth is that more and more evidence points to a possible secret colonization program outside Earth. We're not just talking about tests on space stations or rovers exploring rocky soils. We are talking about hidden bases, infrastructures not officially recognized, and an information network that does not match the communications released to the public. While NASA claims to work with scientific transparency, there are layers of restricted access, encrypted data, and missions that simply disappear from official reports. Coincidence? Or a silent operation being conducted far from our eyes on extraterrestrial soil? An alleged former employee of the agency itself stated that there are projects classified with levels of secrecy that not even some directors have complete access to. These projects, according to him, involve experimental colonization, habitability tests in extreme environments, and even unconventional transport out of Earth's orbit. Was he silenced away for security reasons, or simply labeled as another conspiracy theorist? Images captured by NASA's own probes reveal unusual structures, geometric shadows that cannot be explained by Martian geology, and reflections that resemble metallic structures. Why were these records removed or disqualified so quickly? What you see in this video may change your perception of the most powerful space agency on the planet. Forget what the textbooks told you about space exploration. What lies behind these discoveries may reveal a truth that few are prepared to accept. And now, let's look at what's really going on behind the scenes at NASA and what the evidence is that suggests this off-Earth colonization program. It has already begun, just not for all of us. Before you continue, take a deep breath, because what comes next may be more disturbing than any science fiction you've ever watched. There is information that does not reach the public, files that simply disappear from the internet, and NASA broadcasts that mysteriously are cut live at the exact moment something unusual appears in the images. Coincidence? Or a silent protocol to protect a project that was never meant to be revealed? If you've come this far, it's because does not accept ready-made truths. You want to go beyond the surface. Question what is being hidden behind the big speeches and officially approved images. And that's exactly why this video exists, so that more people like you can access information that bother behind the scenes of power. Colonization off Earth may already be in progress, and while they distract us with tourist rockets and promises for 50 years from now, there is another reality being constructed far away from the eyes of common humanity. Now, get ready. Because from here, we're going to expose the connections between NASA, aerospace billionaires, and files that should never have been accessed. And the most impressive thing is that while most people are worried about the next tourist rocket launch, or the colonization promises made in 30-40 years, silent movements are being done right now, behind the scenes, away from the cameras, the spotlight, and public access. It is no surprise that the main names of the global elite are turning their eyes, their fortunes, and their interests beyond our planet. Elon Musk, for example, has declared several times that his goal is to make humanity multiplanetary. But the question that almost no one asks is, what if this is already happening? In secret, NASA, along with partner agencies and private corporations, has been developing propulsion technologies, extreme housing systems, and terraforming solutions at impressive speed. And suddenly, all of this started to gather pace at the same time. Why this urgency? Why so much massive investment in off-Earth structures, if we are supposedly just testing possibilities? What is striking is that many of these experiments are not widely publicized. They don't appear in the mainstream media. They do not appear in official broadcasts. Instead, they emerge in leaks. Difficult to access technical documents and reports from people who have worked on these projects. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is NASA cooking up something the public isn't ready to know yet? Have you ever stopped to think about the number of classified missions that depart from Earth with the label of scientific experiments, but without details about objectives, crew, or results? Some of these missions do not even appear in the agency's own public records. And when questioned, spokespeople hide behind the generic term national security. But whose safety, and against what? Billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk aren't just playing the space race. They are competing to occupy strategic positions in what many are already calling humanity's new era of escape. Yes, leak. Because the narrative of saving humanity starts to sound like a code for another reality. The selection of who goes and who stays. And guess what? We weren't invited. Meanwhile, here on Earth, we face environmental, social, and political crises on a global scale. The climate is collapsing, resources are running out, and the general feeling is that something much bigger is about to happen. And interestingly, it is precisely in this chaotic scenario that interest in space colonization explodes. But have you ever wondered if this is all just a coincidence, or if these actions are part of a carefully constructed schedule? Outside public knowledge by agencies like NASA, with the support and funding of the global elite. We are talking about infrastructures on Mars, tests of artificial biospheres on the Moon, and autonomous power generation systems, which are already being developed as if they were survival prototypes. And all this without ever officially confirming that there is anything to be feared at this point. And when NASA releases images of Mars, the same feeling always arises. Something is missing, whether due to quality, censored areas, or angles that avoid showing the horizon. Several independent experts have pointed out inconsistencies in several of these images. Shadows that don't match the position of the sun, reflections that shouldn't be there, and even structures with straight lines that suggest something more than random rocks. Structures that, according to some, can be parts of buildings, entrances to underground bases, or unnatural artifacts. This is where the most important detail comes in. NASA has almost absolute control over what is released. And what doesn't pass through the agency's scrutiny simply doesn't exist for the public. But the internet doesn't forgive. And some of these files, even for a few seconds, manage to escape. They were printed, downloaded, analyzed, and, of course, soon after removed, classified as a technical error or compression failure. But those who are paying attention begin to connect the dots. It's no longer about whether or not you believe in conspiracy theories. It's about recognizing patterns. It's about observing the behavior of NASA itself, an agency that increasingly acts as the guardian of knowledge that is not shared with everyone. After all, if everything were so transparent, why are former employees who talk about secret colonies outside of Earth are silenced, discredited, or simply disappear from the map? Did you know that there are ongoing projects in which researchers live for months inside sealed habitats simulating the conditions on Mars? These experiments are called Martian analogs. But, according to leaks, there are indications that some of these simulations are not happening here on Earth. One of the most intriguing reports came from an anonymous source linked to NASA's applied bioscience sector. He claims there is a facility where a highly selected group is already living in totally extraterrestrial conditions, testing long-term biological and technological adaptations, where that's the question no one seems willing to answer. And then the question arises, if this is true, what are they preparing? Why so much research into autonomous farming, life support robotics, harsh environment, artificial intelligence, and colony simulations. Were these just common scientific steps or part of a much larger project, and much older than we imagine? And perhaps the most provocative of all this is the fact that none of these actions seem to have anything to do with improving life here on Earth. On the contrary, while billions are invested in escape technologies, millions of people live without access to clean water, energy, or basic sanitation. And it is in this contrast that the truth begins to reveal itself. If you've made it this far in the video, it's because you feel like something is really wrong. And perhaps, like me, you're also searching for answers that NASA and its partners may not be willing to hand over on a platter. Now tell me, do you believe that there is a secret colonization plan outside of Earth? Do you think they're already living on Mars and they just haven't told us yet? Right here in the comments, I believe in the occult program. If you also feel like this all makes sense, or right, NASA is hiding something. If you still have questions but want to go through this investigation with me, take a deep breath, because from here on, the revelations will get even heavier. We're about to get into the documents, images, and records that could change everything you thought you knew about space colonization and the true role of NASA. And as we delve even deeper into this web of hidden information, what begins to form is a subtle but undeniably present pattern between leaked documents, ambiguous statements, and silent moves by NASA itself. Among circles of former employees and aerospace insiders, one name crops up with unsettling frequency: Project Exodus, a symbolic title loaded with historical weight and meaning, which refers to a mass escape, a journey to a new home, far from the original chaos. And we're not talking about a future project here. We are talking about something that, according to anonymous sources, would already be at an advanced stage, happening in remote locations, out of public reach, or perhaps off the planet. This supposed secret NASA program, called Project Exodus, would have as its main objective to create a habitable base outside Earth, not as a test, but as a real, strategic and silently executed Plan B. The mystery surrounding this name is intensified by the lack of official records. No public mention, no clear references in communications, just fragments. Reports that certain budgets have disappeared from reports, engineering projects terminated without explanation, facilities that were decommissioned overnight as if they had served their purpose and now just needed to ... go. The talk behind the scenes is that Project Exodus began as an extreme environment research program, under the guise of scientific study. But at some point, he would have taken a different path, a militarized, secretive path, focused on survival and selection. And this is where things start to get even more sinister. Confidential reports indicate that structures were sent to Mars in pieces using unidentified payloads under mission codes that officially do not even exist. This raises an uncomfortable suspicion. What if these missions that present us as failed or no data return are, in fact, part of the process of building something bigger, something that is being purposely kept away from the eyes of the population? Images analyzed by independent experts show that in certain regions of Mars there are blurred, intentionally distorted areas, as if there was something there that could not be seen. The most curious thing is that when we cross-referenced these images with old NASA geographic maps, we noticed that certain locations simply disappeared from the current versions. They were removed, changed, and it is at these same points that the greatest speculation about underground bases, pressurized installations, and structures with a clearly artificial shape arises. It is not difficult to imagine that there, far from any terrestrial interference, the outline of a new civilization could be being built, reserved for a few. Some insiders who participated in training at NASA tell of extremely realistic simulations, with protocols that did not fit into any official mission. Evacuation protocols, resistance tests in rarefied atmospheres, scenarios of social collapse and resource management and total isolation. For many of these professionals, it was only after a long time that it hit them. They were being trained to live outside of Earth. And the scariest thing, nobody talked about destiny. The location was always described with generic terms: external zone, point E17, contingency area. Everything carefully calculated to leave no traces. The most daring talk about a shadow crew. Highly selected people who do not appear on public lists of astronauts, but who would have been sent on silent missions, with unregistered flights departing from alternative locations. These missions, according to these reports, were not intended to explore, to occupy, create the foundation of a permanent human presence beyond Earth. And once again, the name Project Exodus is mentioned as the mother operation, the umbrella under which all this happens, financed by sources that we would never imagine linked to space exploration. Large corporations, private investment funds, and even foreign governments would be collaborating, each with a piece of the puzzle, from supplying materials to developing autonomous algorithms to keep operations running even without constant human presence, because the idea, according to these reports, is simple and terrifying. Build first, populate later, securing a functional structure off Earth that serves as a safe haven for a select group, while here the majority remain in the dark. And while all this happens in silence, the official narrative remains the same: exploration missions, scientific experiments, observation of Martian soil. A well-rehearsed script which does not seem to admit the possibility that what is at stake is not just science, but the future of humanity itself. It is no coincidence that many of these former employees choose to remain anonymous. They know that bringing this topic up can have consequences, but they also know that hiding the truth comes at an even greater price. And maybe that's why, even with all their fear, they talk in encrypted form, in closed forums, through encrypted files or disposable emails. They share what they saw, what they experienced, and most importantly, what they couldn't forget. One of them reported that he participated in a simulation where the entire scenario was based on a desert planet with reduced gravity and a controlled atmosphere. The mission? Establish self-sustainable housing protocol in extreme environment. The name of the location was never revealed, but the climate, the landscape, the sounds, everything matched Mars. And the most disturbing thing, the simulations lasted almost a year in total isolation. No contact with the outside world. It is these reports combined with censored images, hidden budgets, and missing data that form a much darker and more complex portrait of reality. And if this is all part of an operation coordinated by NASA, what else is being hidden? What has already been achieved and is being carefully covered up? If you've been following this video this far, it's because you're ready to question, to connect the dots, to see beyond the smokescreen. And now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that Project Exodus exists? That NASA has already quietly begun colonizing another planet? Comment here below. Project Exodus is real. If you also feel this truth coming to light, or right, who does NASA want to leave behind? If you're still reflecting on all this now, hold on tight, because we're about to get into the most sensitive part of this story: the visual evidence, the classified documents, and the testimonies that link it all to what may be the most secretive mission ever carried out by NASA. In 2017, the world was quietly shaken by something that didn't appear in the newspapers, didn't make headlines, and, for many, simply never existed. An alleged former NASA employee, acting anonymously, released images that, according to him, should never have been seen by the public. The images showed supposed artificial structures on Mars, symmetrical shapes, entrances carved into rocky reliefs, and what appeared to be a kind of metallic dome partially buried by Martian dust. The case, of course, was quickly discredited. The images were removed from the internet within hours, Accounts deleted, domains blocked, and silence took over again. But for those who saw it, for those who managed to save part of this material, the doubt remained. What exactly is NASA hiding? The images in question appeared to originate from missions not listed on the agency's public banks. They were captured from angles never disclosed on official channels. The former employee, identified by users as Jackson, said he had participated in internal operations aimed at analyzing data from probes sent to unmapped locations on Mars. According to him, these areas were deliberately omitted from maps released to the public, but internally they were called restricted zones, places where, supposedly, there was already some type of advanced stage installation. Jackson stated that, during his work, he was responsible for filtering and classifying very high-resolution images. In one of these sequences, he came across a formation that clashed with everything he had analyzed. The shapes were too symmetrical. The reflection of sunlight suggested the use of metallic material, and a clear shadow cast itself on the ground, revealing perfect angles. When he took this image to his supervisor, he heard a single sentence: "You didn't see that." Days later, he was removed from the team without explanation. His access was blocked, and according to his report, he was instructed to sign a confidentiality agreement in exchange for benefits that, as he himself said, are not worth the conscience of carrying such a secret. And this was not an isolated case. Several similar reports began to emerge in the following years, coming from technicians, contract engineers, image analysts, and even military personnel involved in joint operations with NASA. The pattern is always the same. Something is seen, reported internally, quickly hushed up, and the person responsible is transferred, shut down, or silenced. In forums and closed groups, these stories are repeated with small variations. But with a common core, there's something being built outside of Earth. They don't want us to know about it yet. These revelations gave rise to a theory that has strengthened over the years: that NASA, together with an alliance of government and private interests, operates a silent colonization program. Mars would be the first destination, but not for everyone. The images that have leaked over time show formations very similar to those we use on Earth in military constructions: modular structures, connecting tubes, circular areas with what appear to be antennas or transmitters. The argument that they are just natural formations seems less and less convincing given the repetition of these anomalies in specific points on the red planet. In addition to the images, videos emerged. Short, poorly recorded, but disturbing. One of them shows a silhouette moving on Martian terrain, captured by one of the probe's cameras. The video, which leaked for just a few hours before being deleted, caused a stir among those who follow the behind the scenes of space exploration. There were those who said it was a failure, a glitch. Others claimed that it was a manipulation. But many believed it was exactly what it appeared to be: evidence of an active presence on Martian soil. This line of thinking gained traction with the discovery that several NASA contracts with technology companies are aimed at developing life, support systems, indoor cultivation, artificial gravity simulation, and autonomous intelligence for resource management. In none of these contracts is there any direct mention of Mars, but in all cases, the description points to use in extreme environments. With a rarefied atmosphere and without natural biological support, coincidence or just the safest way to hide a much larger objective? Some say that some of the technology sent to Mars has not returned. Officially, some probes stopped working, lost contact, or were destroyed. But what if they hadn't failed? What if they were in continuous use? Not as simple data collection robots, but as part of a colonization infrastructure. This hypothesis, however absurd it may seem at first glance, gains strength when we remember that the NASA website itself has already shown signs of edits in public images. In some cases, entire portions of landscapes were pixelated, areas blurred, and metadata erased, An investigation by independent experts found inconsistencies in dozens of images. Comparing old versions with recent updates, they noticed that certain details simply disappeared, as if they were deliberately erased. Changed shadows, previously visible shapes replaced by neutral texture. For what? What is the reason for altering scientific data if not to hide something from the public? This manipulation of information also extends to technical reports. Many files presented to the public come with censored sections, blank pages, or missing data. The official argument is always the same for reasons of national security. But whose safety exactly? From Earth, from the government, or a minority that knows what is really happening in space? Some independent researchers have tried to bring this topic to mainstream media. They were ignored. Others, with courage, published books, gave interviews, participated in events. Many of them faced lawsuits, threats, and even had their channels closed. There is a real and palpable effort to silence any voice that tries to expound these theories. And as they say, when they try so desperately to keep quiet about information ... It's because that information has more truth than they would like to admit. And then I ask you, after all this, do you really believe that NASA is just exploring space? Do you really think that the images they show us are all real, unedited, uncensored? Or could what they're hiding from us be bigger than any of us could imagine? Right below in the comments, I saw the evidence. If you also think these leaks are real and reveal something much bigger. Or comment, I don't believe in coincidences. If you are still connecting the dots, but feel like there is something being hidden, I want to see who is really paying attention. Let's continue. What comes next may be even more revealing. When we look closely at the images released by NASA itself, something begins to bother us, even though at first glance everything seems as expected. Rock formations, mountains, time-worn reliefs, red soil. But the more you observe, the deeper you delve into analyzing these records, the more you realize that not everything there seems natural. And this is not just a personal impression. Several independent experts, scientists disconnected from large institutions, and visual researchers around the world have already pointed out visual anomalies in dozens of supposedly official images of the Martian surface. One of the most discussed anomalies is the presence of perfectly straight lines cutting large tracts of land. In areas where erosion and wind should create smooth, irregular shapes, we find symmetrical markings, 90-degree angles, elevated structures with equal sides. In several of these images, captured by probes such as Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, your curiosity, these formations appear in the background, often blurred or with shadows that make identification difficult. Coincidence or a subtle pattern, carefully hidden but impossible to eliminate completely? There is also the issue of cast shadows. In certain shots, the sunlight should follow a consistent direction. However, shadows projected in the opposite direction appear, creating the sensation that there are objects there, with defined angles and heights, as if they were artificially erected constructions. In some images, we can even make out what appear to be pillars or the outline of structures with multiple levels. These are formations that, according to independent geologists, do not match the geological nature of Mars. And these observations are not recent. In old records dated 1998 and 2001, these same anomalies appear, which reinforces the idea that there is something there being consistently ignored or, at the very least, underestimated. Another point that deserves attention is the metallic artifacts visible in some images. In 2014, for example, a formation was identified that reflected light intensely, as if it were a polished surface, unlike any rock previously found. The image circulated quickly, gained prominence on forums, and technical analyses were made. Regarding the pixelation, the verdict from several of these studies is clear. It wasn't stone. had metal properties. And, as expected, NASA responded by saying it was an optical anomaly caused by the angle of sunlight. But the question remains, why? Among thousands of rocks and dunes, only a few reflect like mirrors. Why, instead of investigating further, do they prefer to end the matter with a superficial explanation? And even more, why, even with advanced mapping and exploration technologies, has NASA never returned to these same points to obtain new images, new data? And it doesn't stop there. In 2021, a sequence of photos was released showing what appeared to be a door carved into a Martian rock. The cut was so precise that at first glance it looked like a montage, but it was an official image, NASA claimed. That it was a natural fracture caused by earthquakes. However, experts refuted this explanation by pointing out that the cut had uniform depth and right angles that were impossible to be generated by a simple tectonic crack. The image went viral, causing heated debates, but as always, it was swept under the carpet with generic technical justifications, some graphic. Analysts have carried out experiments comparing these formations with human constructions in extreme environments here on Earth, such as Antarctica or the Atacama Desert. The result was frightening: the similarity between the structures found on Mars and the bases, built for survival tests in extreme conditions, was very high. This raises an even more disturbing hypothesis. What if these structures are unnatural, because, in fact, are not? And if part of these images are showing what remains of human facilities or something even more advanced? It is worth remembering that, over the years, several files were corrected by NASA. In other words, they were republished with color, brightness, and contrast adjustments. But what was erased in the middle of this process? Many times. Has a geometrically strange structure been digitally smoothed to look like nothing more than a stone? How many originally blurry images were actually hiding some kind of building? There are records of dome-shaped objects, walls aligned in parallel, octagonal shapes in the middle of the natural terrain. All this in supposedly unexplored regions. These formations appear, then disappear in subsequent updates. You can check. Some images available in previous years are no longer available today. And those that remain are in lower resolution or with markings on top. How to explain such inconsistency? NASA says its commitment is to science and transparency. But then why the biggest anomalies? Are they always treated with disdain? Why do the places with the most irregularities never receive new missions? Or when they do, the data is not made public? If there is nothing to hide, why so much control over every image, every record, every line of code captured by the probes? Faced with so many signs, irregular shadows, perfect geometric shapes, metallic reflections, precise cuts in rocks, disappearance of images, what emerges is an increasingly evident patchwork. Maybe they're not trying to hide it completely anymore. Maybe they're just trusting that most people won't look too closely. But you are looking, and you're starting to understand that the evidence is there, hidden in plain sight. If you have already noticed these patterns, comment here. The proof is in the pictures. Or, if you're still processing all of this, write "I'm seeing it now." I really want to know what you think. I want to see who is really paying attention to the details. Let's move on, because we haven't seen everything yet. And what comes next could completely change the direction of this investigation, even in the face of so much visual evidence. Inconsistencies in records and reports from former employees, NASA's official position remains rigid and unshakable. There are no active colonization operations outside of Earth. According to the agency, all images released go through a purely technical curation process with the aim of correcting visual distortions, improving contrast, and facilitating scientific analysis. They claim that there is no censorship, only standardization. But if it's really just that, why do so many images have blurred areas, pixelated zones, or worse, completely removed in later versions. Why were certain regions of Mars, which had suspicious geometric formations, never photographed again? Why? Do the points of greatest interest to the public and independent scientists end up being precisely the most corrected ones? NASA has already been publicly questioned about these details. In interviews, communications, and clarification notes, the agency states that all images are in the public domain and that the material available in its databases is complete. However, civilian researchers who have been following these publications since the 2000s have demonstrated that hundreds of files were silently replaced, some with changes in metadata, others without any plausible explanation for changes evident in the structures present there. When confronting these modifications, the answer is usually vague. Database update, color scale adjustment, resolution improvement. But these answers do not explain the complete deletion of certain frames, nor the replacement of complete images when pressed about the famous case of the door on Mars. That image that went around the world with a straight, cut-in a rock that looked more like an artificial entrance. NASA classified the formation as a natural fracture caused by an earthquake. However, independent geologists refuted the explanation, pointing out that there are no seismic records in that region, and that the symmetry of the cut was incompatible with the type of geological fault normally observed on Mars. Even so, the agency did not comment again, closing the matter as if it were indisputable. But is it really? Another emblematic example was the case of the metallic reflection captured by the Curiosity probe. When the image gained repercussion and began to circulate among experts, NASA claimed that the glow was the result of unusual refraction of sunlight. However, several graphic analysts confirmed that the surface in question had a different density than the other surrounding rocks, indicating that there was something there that was not part of the natural landscape. Once again, the case was hushed up. The image was removed from the official gallery, and a new version, this time less reflective, replaced the previous one. These fixes have not been announced, and the change simply happened. There is also the case of heat signals detected in certain areas of the red planet. Thermal mapping carried out by independent researchers indicated constant temperature variations in areas that, according to NASA, have no activity at all. The agency's explanation was that it was probably a reading error in the sensors. Coincidence? Precisely at the most questioned points do the sensors fail. Precisely in places with suspicious structures does the equipment make mistakes. The frequency of these failures raises more than reasonable suspicions about the agency's transparency. The official stance is always the same: disqualify, redirect, minimize. When asked about the possibility of human presence beyond Earth, the answer is straightforward. There are no colonies. There are no outstations. There are no bases operating on another planet. Everything is in the field of scientific exploration, limited, supervised, and open to the public. But the behind-the-scenes reality shows a very different scenario. If there is nothing to hide, why are contracts with private companies kept under absolute secrecy clauses? Why are entire missions released without full technical detail? And why do former employees who try to expose wrongdoing face lawsuits, loss of credentials, and even veiled threats? It is important to understand that a large part of NASA's activities are financed with public money, which presupposes a minimum of accountability. But what we see, in practice, is the opposite: hidden information, selective cuts, and strict narrative control, where any deviation from the official discourse is quickly silenced. Some journalists who dared to touch on these issues reported direct pressure, denial of interviews, and even cancellation of access to official agency events. Manipulation is not limited to images. Technical documents have also been undergoing changes. Files released under the Access to Information Act in the United States show entire pages redacted, names erased, descriptions replaced with generic codes, reports that were previously available. As PDFs online have been deleted, and in their place, broken links or error messages. All of this happens subtly, almost invisible, but for those who follow closely, it is impossible to ignore the pattern. Many wonder, is this all just paranoia? But the question is, if it was all just theory, why go to such great lengths to hide data, censor files, and replace evidence? Wouldn't it be easier to simply prove that there is nothing out of the ordinary? Why insist on hiding if there is nothing to hide? Now, I want to know your opinion on this. Do you believe NASA is really telling the whole truth? Or do you think there is something much bigger being carefully manipulated? Comment here. NASA knows more than IT shows. If you feel this pattern of censorship is no accident, right? Who controls the images? If you're starting to realize that maybe not everything we see in official records is as reliable as it seems. I want to see who is following this reasoning so far. The investigation is not over. There is still much more to discover. If there really is a base outside of Earth, if NASA is already silently operating a structure outside of our planet, then we are facing one of the biggest divisions in the history of humanity. This is no longer about space exploration. It's about access to truth, survival, and choice. Because if this base is real, if this secret plan is underway, then someone is already deciding who goes and who stays. The question that arises is direct and uncomfortable. Who is part of this plan? Billionaires? Scientists? Senior government officials? And us? Do we stay here and watch everything happen? The world continues to face environmental collapses, economic crises, and conflicts that seem increasingly out of control. Meanwhile, a select group may be preparing for a quiet escape, without warning, without fanfare, out of the public eye. It is a colonization for a few. A reserved future, NASA denies it. He says it's just research, scientific missions, soil tests, sending probes. But everything we've seen so far points to something much bigger. Images hidden, records erased, data censored, former employees silenced. This is not normal. It's not standard. It is not transparent. And if there is so much effort to hide, it is because there is something that cannot be revealed. What if all of this is already underway? What if the base already exists? What if there are already people living outside of Earth, training, adapting to a new environment, while here below we remain in the dark? What happens to those who stay? And more, why run away now? Are they hiding something that will happen here? Or did they find something there that they don't want to share? These questions affect everything. Fear, hope, doubt. Because if that's true, then we're talking about the beginning of a new era. An era where only a few will have the right to continue. The rest? Just watch. If this makes sense to you, comment, what if they're already there? If this concerns you, write who's going to left behind. I want to see who is following this research to the end. Because it's not over yet. What comes next could change everything. After everything you've seen so far, deleted images, suspicious structures on Mars, censored reports, silenced former employees, and NASA's cold and evasive stance when faced with legitimate questions, one thing is certain: something is being hidden. We are no longer just talking about speculation. There are clues, fragments, visual clues, indirect evidence, and contradictions that, when added together, build a much more coherent narrative than institutional silence tries to sustain. The possibility of a secret base outside Earth. It's not science fiction anymore. It's a solid hypothesis based on real movements. Strategic corporate contracts, billion-dollar investments outside the media's radar, and missions that no one can fully explain. Everything indicates that we are living in a new era, but only a few are being prepared for it. And meanwhile, the rest of humanity remains without answers. NASA continues to deny it. The images continue to be filtered. The data remains incomplete. And the increasingly frequent leaks point to a pattern of omission that cannot be ignored. If they really have nothing to hide, why do they act like they do? Now, it's up to you. What do you believe is really happening out there? Has the colonization of another planet begun? Or is this all still part of a big cover-up? Do you think the elite are already building a new world in secret, away from the public eye? Or do you believe that there is still time to understand and react to all of this? Right below the truth is out there if you believe that we are being kept in the dark by something much bigger than we can imagine. Or comment, I want to know the truth. If you are here to investigate with me until the end. Read other people's comments too. Share your insight, because this channel is a community of people who think outside the box and no longer accept being deceived. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this video messed with you. Maybe it was an image, a theory, a detail that had never been told to you. But one thing is certain, you are not alone. More and more people are awakening, questioning, connecting the dots that previously seemed loose. And if you felt this impact, if any of this content opened your mind or made you look differently at NASA, space, or even the future of humanity, this channel is your place. Here, we investigate what no one has the courage to show. Here, you will continue to access content that challenges the official version and confronts the best kept secrets in modern history. So, if you want to continue on this journey with me, subscribe to the channel now. Activate the bell, because the next revelations go even deeper. And so I know that you stayed until the end, that you are part of those who are truly connected. Comment below. I don't believe in silence anymore. This is our code. Whoever comments on this, I will know that they are with me until the end. Let's move on. The truth is getting closer and closer.